but when information about other possibilities starts to become available, we might say, oh, well, that kind of makes sense too, but it sort of contradicts this thing that I've always believed. Right? That doesn't mean that we no longer have beliefs, right? I think that we, I know for sure that we do, and that's a good thing. But the nature of belief, right, I think has been changed somewhat. Yeah.
There's just a lot more skepticism towards these big ideas.
Yeah, it's kind of like skepticism. Yeah. I can give you an example of one that my guess is you're all pretty familiar with. You know, journalism in general, the news media, right? Is something that for a very long time was trusted, right? The news is the news. It's objective reporting on stuff that happens, right? Do we think that now?
No.
No, not at all, right? There are so many different news outlets that present the same information in so many different ways that sometimes it's hard to figure out what exactly happened, right? We tend to ascribe to a particular, outlet as a function of what our beliefs might be. But even then, you know, if you might be, I don't know, say CNN is your preferred. I'm not speaking for any individual, but say CNN is your preferred news outlet, right?
Definitely would be Fox News.
It definitely would be, or wouldn't be? It wouldn't be. Yeah. I think it's easy to distrust Fox News because they contradict themselves so much. So say CNN is your preferred outlet, or actually let's say Fox is this is an easier example to come up with to explicate. Say Fox is your preferred outlet. What happens when they contradict themselves?
You trust them less.
You trust them less, yeah. They might report on one thing in a certain way one day, and then a year later they might come back and say exactly the opposite. One of the reasons we come to know this is a sort of meta news. An example that I can think of is The Daily Show. How many of you watch that show?
Mm-hmm.
You know, The Daily Show, even though it's not a news show per se, I mean, it's at least feasibly or ostensibly a comedy show, right? Picks apart a lot of the news, presents it in a funny way, but the humor derives from the way it contradicts itself. But then again, you know, if we look critically at The Daily Show, we have to realize that they're very selectively picking sound bites in order to show how this inconsistency or these contradictions happen. They don't provide a breadth of context that would enable us to form a very strong argument against a particular media outlet for this kind of contradiction. Does that make sense? So we can critique a media outlet, and then we can critique a media outlet that critiques media outlets, and then we could, you know, if we were to go, I mean, this process could go on indefinitely, right? There's simply so much information and so many different points of view that are available to us that it becomes difficult to pin one down that we could call truth, right? Or label as truth with a capital T. And again, I think that this is a function of widespread available information. Somebody had their hand up. Yeah.
a clear example when I hear like postmodernism and like postmodern art and like postmodern painting and sculpture, like someone will put like a white cube and that'll be their sculpture, or someone like put a red dot in the middle of a white canvas.
It's like sold.
And it's sold for millions, and the aspect of its art comes from its idea of challenging what art is supposed to be, which I think is pretty fascinating.
Absolutely, yeah. And we talked a little bit about this sort of thing last time, I think. Remember, we talked a little bit about the difference between art and craft and art and kitsch. Yeah. That was this class, right?
Yeah.
My memory has been, I think I might have early onset Alzheimer's.
Oh.
Kind of losing it in some ways. Yeah, so art is a good example of how our value, the way we value things is changing. Yeah.
Isn't the red dot the only artist like already established great with artists and that like if I do a red dot I can't sell it and make myself hundreds of thousands of dollars because nobody knows me. And then what if this well-established artist just wants to make a quick buck and is like, well, I've already done actually good stuff.
Yeah.
So I'm really tired now. I'm just put a red dot.
Yeah.
So I don't know. That's
I think we started to talk a little bit about that last time too. Yeah. And my favorite example of this is a Saturday Night Live skit from quite a long time ago, in which one of the actors was playing the role of Picasso, and he was sitting in a cafe, a sidewalk cafe, and he was like blowing his nose into a Kleenex, and he signed it and sound it because it was it was an original Picasso. It's kind of disgusting, but yeah, I think a fine illustration. Yeah.
Seems like with a lot of that type of art, as like with any art, it's like this long discussion that if you're not in that culture, you're not a part of. So when they do something like draw this big red dot on a white canvas, it's like everybody that is going to see his work knows exactly what his thought process was behind that, and we don't. Like that's why we don't. But we think it's stupid, because I think it's stupid. but obviously they get it, and I don't. So there's like it's almost like this conversation that I didn't catch.
Or they think they get it.
Or that too.
Or they think other people get it, and it might be just enough to think that other people get it. Yeah.
They're just buying it because they want to think
That they understand
established
it.
arts
Yeah.
items.
I think a lot of beliefs are centered in the idea that, or the belief that other people know, right? There's this concept in psychoanalysis, the other, right? The other that is assumed to know. The other that is assumed to know or perceived to know. Know with the K, like knowledge, that kind of know. Or the other that is presumed or assumed to be able to do something, to produce a piece of art, right? We might call this other, we might perceive this other as an agent. As a person who is able to produce art, right? Whether it be writing or painting or any other form of art. Yeah.
And so the postmodern critique of what was it, the autonomous agent? Could we take that to mean that postmodernists would critique like traditional rhetoric by saying that a rhetor can't be trusted to create rhetoric, like it can't all come from him? Because it was kind of it was kind of hard to get at. Like I found the quote that had or the section that had the critique, but it was hard to articulate. Basically saying that postmodernists like critique rhetoric for everything it is. So I guess that makes sense, but.
Yeah, or maybe not critique rhetoric necessarily, but critique traditional views of what rhetoric is and what it means to perform rhetoric. Yeah, the postmodern critique in so many words is a critique of the agent, right? The person who performs rhetoric, the rhetor, right? The critique of the rhetor as the origin, right, of the particular discourse or the particular production of some kind of communication, right? Critique of the rhetor as the origin of discourse, rather than as an articulation of discourse, an articulation of an already existing discourse. We can think of articulation in the special sense that I just used it as a struggle to fix meaning, right? A struggle to fix meaning and temporarily define reality.
See that again? What is it?
Okay, articulation. We can define articulation in this special sense, right, as an attempt to fix meaning, or a struggle to fix meaning and temporarily define reality. So when I'm blanking out on the artist who put the red dot in the center of the white canvas. I used to know, but I can't remember who that is. But when that person puts that red dot, right, in the center of the canvas, is that person the origin of that piece of quote-unquote art? Or is that person articulating a sensibility regarding art that is in some way or another agreed upon by a larger group? Perhaps what we might call a discourse community after Bartholomew. We could think of Cheryl Geisler as an articulation, right, of a discourse community, or the discourse that Cheryl Geisler produces, right, as an articulation of a discourse community called rhetoric. And because of the nature of this particular article, I think it's kind of easy to make this assumption of it being an articulation, because it is very much a review article, right? She talks a little bit about her own work, but for the most part, she's talking about the work of others, right? And the sort of, if we can look at the purpose for the piece, the purpose is to kind of wrap our heads around what rhetoric is, right? And a particular question that a particular question that might be asked within the discipline of rhetoric. How ought we to understand the concept of rhetorical agency? Yeah.
Is one of the criticisms that agency is kind of a far more rare thing than they might think? Because it seemed like it was very, one of the criticisms of it was that it was too restrictive on certain groups, because not all groups could exercise agency.
Yeah, not all groups have access to a sort of public forum in which agency could be exercised. Is that kind of what you're saying? Yeah. And that's certainly one of the themes that she talks about, agency as conditional, right? There are three themes, right? The first one is the illusion of agency. And, I have it written more eloquently than I can say it. The skill of a rhetorical agent, the illusion of agency, the skill of an agent, and agency as conditional. In other words, we might have agency in one situation, but not in another. Do any of you have children? So if you have a child, right, you certainly have agency when it comes to raising that child. But in other situations, you may not be able to get done what you want to get done in language. In other words, you might not be a particular age. And sometimes as a parent, I sometimes question my agency with my child. He seems to be a much more astute rhetor than I sometimes. He's very capable of getting what he wants by using language, or by using language broadly construed, right? Various behaviors and whatnot. Children tend to be very persuasive. Especially when they start crying. They're very good at manipulating their parents with guilt, I think.
Yeah.
At least I've experienced that. for me. Look what you did to me. Yeah, I mean, why did you bring me into this awful world? That might not be what they're thinking at all, but it might get them what they want. Right? You went to France without me, so you need to buy me something. What's that? I know, yeah, I didn't take you. That's actually true. I went to France last summer for 2 weeks and didn't take my son. I'm not sure he would have had a good time. Next time, maybe. Maybe.
You can bring a skateboard.
What's that?
Said he can bring a skateboard.
Yeah, he could bring his skateboard. All right. So we'll talk more about what postmodernism might be, and then we'll even take it another step and introduce this term post-structuralism next time when we read the gun and lumber trees. I want to give you an opportunity to sort of discover that on your own before we go into too much discussion about that. Yeah. So what else did you talk about in your groups? I feel like I've been talking a lot and haven't given you a chance to discuss the things that you talked about in your groups and in broader form. So maybe it's time for me to shut up a little bit.
A large part of our discussion, at least for me, was trying to vet out just what exactly the specifics of what you were saying. There was a lot of terms and ideas thrown out in a short article, not a lot of explanation.
Right.
A lot of stuff that she talked about became more clear discussing it with others.
Good. Well, that's good. That's the idea. Yeah.
And one of the things that we tried to wrap our heads around was, at least for me, was the abject horror of contingency.
The abject horror of contingency. Yeah.
Which was like, what do we agree on? Was like the horror in the face of like.
Right. It has to do, kind of the way that I read it was that it's being able to look at an issue rhetorically without having to be directly involved in all of the terrible things that go with it, like being in the contingent, as it were. Because the contingent, it's like the example that I was thinking of was like debating things that have to do with, super serious issues in other countries. You're not there, but you can still have an opinion about it without having to be a part of the actual scary parts.
Okay.
Another way that I was thinking about is maybe the contingency, the horror being is that it's the contingency is if like the condition of agency, if they don't have a voice, does that invalidate any argument or point they might have to make?
Yeah. It's scary to think that all of these things happen around us without us having it controlled. My guess is that all of you drive a car. Is that right? Do any of you not drive? Yeah. I mean, can you? Do you have a license?
Like I can, but I don't.
Yeah. And you have before.
Yeah.
So driving a car might be a good example of this. We can only have so much control over the vehicle. Right? There are a lot of other people out there driving too, and our safety is contingent upon the actions of others. It's kind of scary. As far as other things going on in different places where we're not a part of them, right, but we can still have an opinion, that's really interesting, and I'm kind of still trying to wrap my head around that. In the context of something's going on.
Right, it's going on.
Somebody's having a good time or not so much. Should we go beat them up?
Yeah, let's do it.
Should we go strip them of their agency? Interestingly, well, we don't have anything to do with what's going on out there, but we have opinions about it. Some of us might be of the mind that, well, they're having a good time, that's good, that makes me happy that other people are out there having a good time. I wish I was out there with them having a good time. I don't mean I do, but you might think that. Or, God, I wish they would shut up. I think that you know, the nature of our class, right, is contingent upon what might be going on out in the hall, right? That outburst out there, for instance, affected us. It guided our discussion in a certain way. That's not particularly scary, but at the same time, it's a contingency. Yeah, go ahead.
She brings up the term crisis fantasy.
Mm-hmm.
Is that, and that's kind of related to what the object for contingency? Is that kind of just sort of, it's bad that there's some inconsistencies with the ideas that are being discussed, but it's almost like it's frozen the discussion. So, I mean, it's comfortable that you don't have to talk about it because it's too hard out, sort of that kind of thing. Or it's like,
I am enamored of this term crisis fantasy. It seems to me that a lot of the crises that we perceive are indeed fantastic, right? Or fantasies. That's not to say that there aren't real crises, don't get me wrong. I mean, people suffer, and that's a crisis. But if we think about our own, we think about our lives and the various events that get to us in some way or another, right? Oftentimes, if we take a deep breath and step back, our perspective changes and we realize that the problems that we might be experiencing aren't such a big deal in the grander scheme of things.
What's the internet meme? First world problems.
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah. First world problem. Yeah, I mean, all of us in this room are very fortunate in many ways, regardless of the things that we may have suffered. Just by virtue of the fact that we're in here and we have the luxury of talking about rhetorical agency as if it is this highfalutin important thing, right? Most of us, you know, have had access to food today, shelter, clean water. Don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to say that our problems are irrelevant, right? Because they are. I think that everybody's problems are just as severe to them as anybody else's, regardless of what they might be.
So, this whole object for contingency, would you say that it, like, define it, it might be like being afraid to depend upon, like, I can't, okay, never mind.
Well, let me see if I can kind of figure out where you're going with that. If we believe in something, right? And then all of a sudden we are exposed to, or something that is counter to that thing that we believe in is revealed, right? That can be kind of scary, right? We take this back to childhood. You know, most of us when we were children, and I know that there are exceptions, perhaps even in this room, but a lot of us when we were children had this perception of our parents being sort of omniscient, yeah? They had all of the answers. They were extraordinarily stable. And it's a major shift in our consciousness when we realize that, my God, they're just people. You know? They suffer the same kinds of problems that we do. They question themselves. They might experience self-doubt. They might suffer from depression. They might, you get the idea? And so, their humanity, right, becomes a contingency that we haven't dealt with, and that can be quite scary. The thing that we believed in as being something rock solid, as a ground upon which we can stand, a resource that is never ending and stable. When that is called into question, the stability of that that thing is called into question, it can be quite disconcerting. Right? It can also be cause for revelry too. You know. Personally, I take great joy in the idea that things aren't necessarily as stable as we might want them to be. I think that they are.
So, could you maybe say that like, it would be like being afraid to depend upon something that isn't stable, that's not like a clear picture?
Yeah, or the fear that comes from realizing that it's not stable. Which would lead them to a fear of, I guess a fear, right? Or a fear of instability. Right? A fear of relying on something. You might think of this in terms of commitment issues, you know, to use a term that's bandied about quite frequently these days. Yes?
It makes me think of something that Chartres might say as an existential concept of your responsibility to craft your